In the ancient game of empires, nothing happens by accident. Every alliance, every war, every handshake is a move on a cosmic chessboard that was set up centuries ago. The West looks at the Sahel today and sees only chaos. They see the tricolor flag of the Russian Federation waving in the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, and they recoil in horror. They call it interference. They call it Russian propaganda. They scream from the podiums of the United Nations that Vladimir Putin is invading their backyard, that he is destabilizing a region that belongs to them by right of history. But the elders of the Sahel, the keepers of the old wisdom who sit under the baobab trees, see something entirely different. They do not look at the headlines of CNN or the BBC. They look at the ancient prophecies, and there is a whisper that has been carried on the Harmattan wind for generations, a spiritual law that governs the fate of nations. When the eagle tries to devour the lion cub, the bear from the north will descend to break the eagle's wings. For 400 years, the relationship between Europe and Africa has been that of the hammer and the anvil. The West came with Bibles in one hand and rifles in the other. They carved up the continent like a cake at the Berlin Conference of 1884. They stole the gold to back their currencies. They stole the rubber to fuel their industries. And they stole the uranium to light their cities, all while leaving the children of the Sahel in the dark. They grew fat while Africa grew thin. But the universe is a self-correcting mechanism. It seeks balance. Karma demands a counterweight. Yet when one side of the scale becomes too heavy with oppression, history summons a force to level it out. Enter the bear. To understand why Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young man of 34 years with no prior political experience, dared to open the gates to Russia, we must look beyond the simplistic narratives of modern geopolitics. We must look at the spiritual memory of the land. Historically, Russia stands as a unique anomaly among the great European powers. It is the only major white empire that never scrambled for Africa. They never owned a single African slave. They never established a colony to extract resources for Moscow. In fact, during the bloody wars of independence in the 1960s and 70s, when the fathers of African liberation were fighting against the British, the French, and the Portuguese, whilst it was not Washington that sent them aid, it was not London. It was the Soviet Kalashnikov that armed the freedom fighters. It was the universities of Moscow that educated the African engineers when the West only wanted them to be laborers. The spirit of the Sahel remembers this. The land has a memory. It remembers who brought the chains and who brought the wire cutters. It remembers who treated the African as a beast of burden and who treated him as a comrade in arms. So, when the crisis of terrorism threatened to swallow Burkina Faso whole, when the French troops stationed in the country sat idly by while villages burned, Ibrahim Traoré made a calculation that was both desperate and divine. He realized that the security offered by the West was a trap. It was a fire that burned the house down while pretending to put it out. But he needed a new kind of fire. He needed the fire of the North. If you are someone who believes that history is not just what they teach in school, but what is hidden in the silence between the lies, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We are connecting the dots that the mainstream media is terrified to touch. Join our community of truth seekers. When Traoré shook hands with Vladimir Putin at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, the image sent a shockwave through the Western world. The media portrayed it as a submission, a desperate dictator begging for help. But look at the footage again. Look at Traoré's posture. He did not bow. He did not smile with the obsequious grin of a servant. He stood tall in his combat fatigues and red beret, looking the Russian president in the eye as an equal. Whilst it was not a meeting of master and slave, it was a reunion of old trenchmates. The West gasped in horror, but the African street erupted in cheers. Why? Because the people understand instinctively that to fight a demon, the demon of neocolonialism, you need a giant. And the only giant big enough to scare the eagle is the bear. Critics in Paris and Washington cry out, "But Russia is just another empire. You are trading one master for another. You are selling your sovereignty to the Wagner group." Traore has answered this criticism with the pragmatic wisdom of a soldier who has seen his brothers die in the sand. He knows that a drowning man does not ask the lifeguard for his resume or his political affiliation. He grabs the hand that is extended. France offered partnership that kept the terrorists alive and well-funded for 10 years. Russia offered tools. There is a mystical pragmatism here that we must explore. The Russian forces, often demonized in the West, are seen by many in the Sahel not as mercenaries, but as the iron dogs of the prophecy. Ruthless spirits sent to hunt down the hyenas that have been plaguing the villages. Sometimes peace does not come from a dove holding an olive branch. Sometimes peace comes from a hammer smashing the lock of a prison cell. And Russia is the hammer that Traoré is wielding to shatter the glass house of French influence. The symbolism of this alliance extends to the very elements of nature. Russia is the land of ice and snow, of endurance and cold calculation. The Sahel is the land of fire and dust, of passion and explosive energy. Alchemically, this is the union of opposites. Fire and ice. When these two elements combine, they create steam, energy, power, movement. The West is stagnant. Their empires are old, tired, and crumbling under the weight of their own hypocrisy, like Rome before the fall. But the East, led by Russia and China, and the South, led by the awakening lions of Africa, are rising. This is the multipolar world that Traoré speaks of with such fervor. It is not just an economic theory about trading in yuan or rubles. It is a spiritual realignment of the planet. The center of gravity is shifting away from the Atlantic and moving towards the Eurasian-African axis. Even the famous blind mystic Baba Vanga, whose predictions have haunted the Balkans for decades, spoke of a time when the bear would become a dominant force and that the glory of the East would rise. While we must be careful with such mystical predictions, one thing is undeniably clear. The West has fatally underestimated the resilience of the bear, just as they underestimated the courage of the lion Traoré. They thought sanctions would crush Russia's economy in weeks. Russia grew stronger, becoming more self-reliant. They thought threats and aid cuts would crush Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso grew prouder, finding dignity in its struggle. They are two nations forged in the fire of rejection. They are the outcasts of the global liberal order. The West tried to cancel them, to erase them from the map of respectable nations. And when the outcasts unite, when the rejected stones become the cornerstones of a new building, the establishment trembles. Well, let us look at the practical application of this prophecy of the bear. What has actually changed since the Russian flags started appearing in Ouagadougou? The dynamic of the war has shifted. For years, the terrorists operated with a suspicious impunity. They moved in convoys that were somehow invisible to French satellites. They struck and vanished. But with the arrival of new partners, the invisible became visible. The Russian instructors did not come to sit in air-conditioned bases and drink wine. They came to teach the Burkinabe soldiers how to fight a modern war. They provided the heavy equipment, the helicopters, the surveillance drones that France had refused to sell. Suddenly, the lion cub, the Burkinabe army, began to roar. Villages that had been occupied for years were liberated. Roads that had been closed by mines were opened. The psychology of the battlefield changed. The terrorists realized that the rules of engagement had shifted. They were no longer fighting a demoralized army holding broken rifles. They were fighting a force backed by the military-industrial complex of a superpower. This is why the Western media is in a frenzy. They are not afraid for the safety of the Burkinabe people. If they cared about that, they would have solved the problem 10 years ago. They are afraid because their monopoly on violence has been broken. For centuries, the West held the exclusive right to be the protector of Africa. It was a protection racket. Pay us with your resources, and we will protect you from the chaos that we secretly create. Traore stopped paying. He fired the protector, and he hired a rival security firm. Well, if this analysis is opening your eyes to the reality of what is happening, please hit the like button. It helps us break through the algorithm that tries to suppress this kind of content. Your interaction is your vote for the truth. But this alliance is not just about guns and ammo. It is about food. It is about survival. When the West placed sanctions on Russian grain and fertilizer, trying to starve the Russian economy, they ended up starving Africa. The price of bread skyrocketed in Cairo, in Dakar, in Lagos. The West shrugged and blamed Putin. But what did Putin do? He sent free grain to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Zimbabwe. Ships loaded with wheat sailed from the Black Sea to the ports of West Africa, breaking the blockade. To the hungry mother in the village, this was not geopolitical maneuvering. This was manna from heaven. Well, this was the difference between life and death. The bear brought food when the eagle brought sanctions. This solidified the spiritual bond between the people. You cannot convince a man that Russia is his enemy when Russia is the reason his children are eating tonight. There is a deeper, more shadow-filled aspect to this story that we must touch upon. The enemy within, the Judas leaders of ECOWAS we discussed in our last episode, are terrified of this Russian connection. Why? Because Russia offers a regime survival package that does not come with lectures on Western-style democracy. The West demands that African leaders hold elections that can be manipulated, sign trade deals that favor Western corporations, and allow NGOs to push foreign cultural agendas. If a leader refuses, he faces a coup or an assassination. Here, Russia asks for none of these things. They ask for partnership. They ask for neutrality. This is attractive to a leader like Traoré, who is trying to build a sovereign state from scratch. He does not need a lecture on human rights from the countries that bombed Libya back into the Stone Age. He needs concrete support to save his nation from collapse. However, we must also be wise. We must listen to the warnings of the ancestors who say, "Do not let the stranger sit in the master's chair." Traoré is aware of the danger. He knows that Russia is not a charity. The bear is hungry too. But Traoré believes he can manage the bear. He believes that unlike the eagle, which wants to consume the lion, the bear is content to walk beside it, as long as they hunt together. It is a gamble of historic proportions. If he is right, then he will have liberated West Africa from 400 years of servitude. If he is wrong, he will have merely changed the color of the flag flying over the mines. But looking at the stars, the alignment favors the bold. The world is tired of the unipolar moment. The global South is tired of being lectured. The arrival of the Russia-Africa alliance is the tipping point. It is the moment when the playground bully realizes that his victim has made a friend in the boxing club. The prophecy of the bear is not about Russian domination. It is about the hammer of God being used to break the chains. The bear is the tool, not the architect. The architect is Ibrahim Traoré. He is the one using the Russian alliance to build the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. He is using the shield of the East to protect the growing unity of the South. Yet as the sun sets over the Sahel, the dust is settling on a new reality. The French ambassadors have packed their bags. The American drones are being grounded. And in their place, a new language is being spoken. The language of sovereignty, backed by the steel of the North. The eagle is screeching because it knows its time is up. It can no longer swoop down and steal the prey with impunity. The bear is standing guard at the gate, and behind the massive frame of the bear, the lion cub is growing. It is growing its mane. It is sharpening its claws. And it is finally, after centuries of silence, learning to roar. To the enemies of the Sahel, be warned. You are no longer fighting a helpless victim. You are fighting a coalition of the willing, a brotherhood of the rejected, and an alliance written in the stars. The North has come to the South, while the ice has come to the fire, and together they are writing the obituary of the colonial age. What do you think about this alliance? Is Russia the savior of the Sahel, or just another player in the game? Do you trust the bear? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The debate is open, and history is listening. And remember, the revolution will not be televised. It will be digitized, and it will be shared by you. Share this video, and let the world know that the lion is no longer alone.